Hey, everybody, welcome back to Listen for Real. I'm Jen Oliver. Rachel Loewenherz is in the house, and I'm really excited about this conversation because this woman has built like this. Well, I'm not even going to tell you what she built yet. Let me start with something else. There is something about who we are and astrology that I find fascinating. But if you know me, you know that I was that person who poo pooed anything astrological. I was that person who would have said to you a while back in my narrative and in my myopic viewpoint that astrology was for soft headed people who needed the power of suggestion and that it had no play in real life. I was that person. And as you all know, why do we have this podcast? I love to debunk things. I also really want to get out of my own echo chamber, which has a limited perspective. And so I set forth in this podcast and in other areas of my life to have conversations with people who are going to blow up my paradigm, help me shift them where necessary. And Rachel's one of those people. She is phenomenal. And I love how brilliant and soul led and mission driven she is, and I find her dazzling. And I know you guys, this is going to get, we already, like, just prior to starting recording, it was like, we're talking about my dating, we're talking about her life. Like, we're already kind of vibey, and I love that. So this is going to be a pretty earthy, real conversation about the power of this. And then, yes, now I want to tell you because I felt like I needed to give the precursor. Yes, she's also, Ivy League educated. Yes, she is building this powerful AI model that helps us better understand ourselves through astrology. And this is no soft, small thing. It is significant. And I think it was the person who introduced us, or maybe it was you, Rachel, that said it's like part oracle, part strategist, like if ChatGPT knew your very soul. And I can't remember if that was from you or her or AI. Who knows? But I would love you to just tell everyone who you are, and I want to get into some really earthy, good stuff. I want you to talk about Star Path, obviously, because I just think this is an amazing product, which I'm really excited to get on. But this has never been a commercial like podcast platform. And so my audience is probably unaccustomed to like, what? But y'all just stay with me for a minute because there's so much underneath this. This isn't just a shameless plug, although it should be, about a cool product and about a cool app. This is like a game changer, but it's this conversation that I'm really hoping just opens your heart, like feeds you, nourishes you where you're at, y'all, and allows you to just join in, get on the couch with us, and get into some really interesting conversation about what it means to be these, like, in my humble opinion, these eternal souls who happen to be in bodies on this planet right now is the way I personally see it and view it, and how that experience has been for Rachel, how it's been for me, and then how knowing more about astrology and aligning with it really is soul opening, eye opening, just a really beautiful journey. So, the biggest preamble ever, but I want you all to just know what you're in for. It's going to be so good. So, Rachel, tell them everything you want them to know about who you are in the world and how this all came to be. And then let's get into some really personal, nitty gritty stuff as to why this even matters. Like, why is this important that we have something like Star Path and understand astrology and its purpose in our lives and its presence?
Yeah, amazing. Well, first of all, thank you, Jen, so much for having me. I'm just so honored to be here. And wow, how much time do we have? And do you want
Seriously.
the full story or the nutshell version?
I think your story has such depth, and I just want people to know you first before they know anything else. For me, knowing you and a little bit about you and kind of who you are, I think informs the rest of the conversation really beautifully. And if we were on the couch, I'd be like, you guys, you need to know her more deeply. So
Okay.
You decide where you wanna go with that. Boom.
Dive in. I will just start at the very beginning because I think in a lot of ways where I am right now, I mean, it is the product of my life's journey. It did not start recently. I was not always the way that I am today. In fact, I would say I'm quite different in many ways than I used to be. And it's all been an unfolding one layer at a time. So, where to begin? So, I grew up in Beverly Hills, of all places. And I was part of a pretty traditional family. My dad was a doctor, my mom was an actuary. My dad went to Harvard. I ended up going to Yale. And I grew up in this very type A environment with a lot of perfectionist tendencies, as many of us have. I got the straight A's. I got a perfect score on my SAT, if you can believe that that's actually real. And it's crazy to think about now, but that was who I was. I worked really, really hard and I identified with being a good girl. I was
Yeah.
really a good girl with this beautiful moral compass. And I always checked the boxes. I did the things right. And for a long time, I think that was sort of the primary theme that defined me as a person, which was I work really hard and I do the things that I'm supposed to do, and things work out for me because I did what I was supposed to do. And growing up, I was spiritual actually growing up. My family wasn't very religious. I grew up in a Jewish family and I actually wanted to be a rabbi growing up. So I was pretty involved in that community. And when I started studying at Yale, I was a Judaic studies major. So I have a degree in religion. And then my senior year of college, I remember hearing this voice, and this was very out there for me at the time, but I heard this voice that said, Rachel, these are not your people. And I remember thinking, like, what? Like, what do you mean these are not my people? Like, of course these are my people. But I had this moment where I didn't feel called to join the clergy anymore. So I went into consulting because like what else was I gonna do? I needed
Like any non-rabbi would do.
right? Yeah. And I actually ended up in the market research world. And it was the most incredible way to start my career because market research is all about understanding people and asking really good questions and figuring out why people think the way they do and why they make decisions the way that they do. And so I think that was really my first entry point into why are we the way that we are? And the interesting thing about market research is that it's very data driven. So you design these surveys, you ask these questions, and then you're literally gathering data and looking for patterns and telling stories. And that's how I got into business strategy. And so from there, I ended up going into the tech industry and product marketing. And so I've had this career in the consulting world, in tech. I ran a couple of businesses in there. And that's what my life looked like on the surface, on paper. But then there was this undercurrent happening beneath that. So while I was working at the market research firm, I had my first health crisis. I was diagnosed with interstitial cystitis, which is this inflammatory condition of the bladder. And it just came out of nowhere. And I didn't know anything about holistic health. And I ended up, over many years, just completely putting that into remission with anti inflammatory diets and things like that. And so I think that was my first indicator that maybe some things about the ways that I was living and working were not actually working for me.
Yeah.
But at the time, I'm not sure I saw it as the red flag that it was, that maybe I was pushing myself too hard. I was working in ways that weren't supporting my body, and my body was talking back. And so I kind of just kept going along the path. And I married my college sweetheart, Dan, who's actually my business partner now. And again, we did all the things right. So, I married a nice Jewish boy. We got married 2 years out of college. We bought a house. We decided to start a family. And that's when the plot line really started to shift because we decided to get pregnant. And our first month trying, we got pregnant with identical twin girls, which was this beautiful blessing. And we lost them at 20 weeks, actually, because of a genetic issue. And it was a huge shock. I mean, it was the first time in my life that I ever experienced trauma, like capital T trauma. And I had no frame of reference for how to deal with it. We started having kids younger than our friends, like nobody knew what to say or what to do. And so I found myself looking for answers. And, we did ceremony with our rabbi, and that helped a little bit. And I talked with my friends, and that helped a little bit, but there was no reason. There was no why. And that was when I started seeking answers outside of the frameworks that I had grown up with. And we went through IVF. We had my son who just turned 9. And when he was born, that's when things really started to shift again because my body started talking. And I remember I was working at Dell at the time, and I was sitting in my cubicle pumping like 5 times a day and thinking to myself, I went through all of this to have children, and like, this is what I'm doing now. Like, this does not feel right. So I ended up leaving the corporate world and took my first foray into the entrepreneurial world. And it was the first time that I think I ever broke free from a system that I always assumed I would be in. So I remember a coworker actually asking me when I was pregnant, he was like, "Are you going to work after you have the baby?" And I remember I was so offended, Jen. I was so offended. I thought to myself, like, how could he possibly ask me that? Like, of course I will continue working and climbing this ladder. And a few months into having a baby, I was suddenly like, oh my gosh, I get it. My body is completely different now. And my purpose feels completely different. And nothing about the way that I was living before feels appropriate for me now. So that was when I started like really having to support my body in different ways. And I remember joining this women's circle called Sacred Motherhood. And it was the first women's circle that I had ever joined. A bunch of ladies that were in my prenatal group, and it was led by our doula. And it exposed me to a lot of, I call them feminine technologies that I was not raised with. And so from there, I really started deepening with more divine feminine earth-based practices for living in ways that really could support me as a body because my body was becoming increasingly sensitive as I was getting older. And all of that felt really good for a while. At the time, I was running a software consultancy with my husband. And then out of the blue, Dan got really, really sick. So he got what now I think we would think of as long COVID. It happened to him after Epstein Barr, and it just completely crushed his body. And so I found myself with a toddler and a husband who could hardly get out of bed. And I was the caregiver, the solo parent, and the sole breadwinner. And that was a huge wake up moment for me because I had to learn how to exist in this trauma soup, where there was so much stress around me. And at the same time, I had to support my family and not burn out. And my body was highly sensitive. So, and I went back to corporate. So I was in the tech world again. And I really had to start working and living in different ways. And so for me, that meant adopting more of a cyclical approach to living. So working with the moon cycles, the seasons, working in cycles of intensity and rest. And I mean, rest, what's that concept? Like, I was not raised to really make rest a part of my existence. And what's funny is that now through astrology, I understand certain elements of why rest is particularly important for me. But at the time, it was a survival imperative because burning out was like, it was just not an option on the
Yeah.
menu of my life. And so, eventually my husband did heal and he went back to work, and I had some more flexibility in my career. And I started a business and marketing strategy business. And I didn't mention through this time I was having surgeries and going through IVF, and there was just all this stuff that was continuing to happen with my body. And I was kind of forging ahead. But then things really changed for me in 2020. So I started a business and marketing coaching business earlier in that year. Then, of course, the pandemic happened, and I left my corporate job because my kiddo was at home. And we figured, well, I hadn't been able to get pregnant through all of this IVF and all of these surgeries. Like, let's just try naturally, and maybe we'll have a genetic issue again. Maybe we won't, but none of the other methods worked. So let's give it a go. And once again, I got pregnant our first month trying, and I lost another daughter at 17 and a half weeks this time. And this was the moment where I really went from seeking and exploring and dabbling in modalities that were maybe a little bit woo to full on living in that world. And I had really a complete spiritual awakening through my pregnancy and my loss of Rebecca. And
Because of desperation. Is it a desperation that makes it not just a dabbling, but it's like a need?
yes, and I think she actually woke me up, like literally having her soul inside me, because I met her in meditation before I knew I was pregnant. And I had
Really?
never experienced anything like that before, and I didn't even realize it at the time, and then I found out I was pregnant, and I was like, "Whoa, this is crazy." And she was just very present with me that whole pregnancy. Like, I could feel her and sense her and connect with her, and it wasn't that way for me with my other, 3 babies that I'd carried. And then when I lost her, it was like it was a near death experience. It was a very traumatic loss. And I remember walking out, and feeling like I could see this hole, this void that was over my womb space. And I've come to understand a lot more about that in recent years. But at the time I didn't really know what it meant. But she really just she blew me open. She kind of just blew my whole, you could call it a spirit bubble open. And suddenly I could just feel things and sense things that I couldn't before. And sometimes it's trauma itself that sensitizes us to that. It's like hypervigilance and the survival brain going into scanning mode. But I think often for many people that's paired with spiritual awakening because it does help us sense things that we maybe weren't attuned to previously. So it was during that time where I was still very raw from that pregnancy loss where I heard a podcast about astrology. And I remember listening to this, and I didn't know anything about astrology. I definitely would have poo pooed it if someone had been like, Rachel, do you know this about yourself? I'd be like, yeah, whatever. But I remember hearing my first astrology teacher speak on this podcast, and something in me just said, you have to go do this. And so I did. I got a reading with Leslie McGurk, and then I got another reading and another reading. And then I started working with her quarterly because it completely changed my self perception. It was the first modality that ever gave me answers about why I was losing these babies, about why certain health issues were present for me. And maybe it's my type A, historical patterns, but I'm an action taker. Like, I am not someone who operates with the victim mindset. I'm very much like, okay, this is happening. Why is it happening? And what now? Like, what can I
Right.
do with this? Because sometimes trauma, it makes us feel so powerless. These things are happening to us. And I've always preferred to co create with what's happening, even when it's been very dark and very challenging. And astrology gave me a way to do that. And it was very unexpected. And so, initially, oh, go ahead. You were going to ask a question.
Yeah. Can you give an example for the uninitiated? Because I know this is hard for a lot of people, including me, to understand. Can you give one example? So, in that scenario, what in astrology revealed something that suddenly made everything completely clear?
Yes. Okay. So I have a placement in my chart, my moon, which represents, I'll give you two examples actually. My most challenging part of my chart and my favorite part of my chart. So the most challenging part of my chart is my moon conjunct the asteroid Chiron. And the moon in astrology represents your emotions, the subconscious, your mother and children and parenting, also the body. And then Chiron, if you know Greek mythology, is the archetype of the wounded healer. He was a
Mm,
centaur who taught medicine and taught many of the great heroes. And he received a wound from a poison arrow that created chronic pain, and he was immortal, so he couldn't die until he eventually. Well, that's another story. But the idea behind Chiron is that your wounding is also your greatest wisdom and your greatest potential to heal other people. And for me, those two placements are in the sign of Gemini, which is the twins. It's the sign of the twins. And so when you look at that pairing, your deepest wounding next to the placement of motherhood and children in the sign of the twins, at that time, I was like, oh my gosh, this is like the loss of my twins and why I keep having all of this deep trauma related to motherhood and bearing of children. And so that really unlocked a lot for me because it gave me a different way to look at what I had experienced. And I remember in my business at the time, I actually ended up pivoting my business and I created this whole quiz called the Mother Change Quiz, which was all about the way that we initiate to motherhood and how that changes our soul work. And so it gave me immediately a different portal into the type of work that I was doing that was way more. And then my favorite part of my chart is I have Pluto, who in mythology is the god of the underworld. So death and rebirth and transformation, and also like wealth and charisma, right next to my career point, which is called the midheaven in the 11th house of the collective. And so when you put all of that together, you get a placement for someone who is supposed to really change the world in a transformational way on a large scale, like a large collective scale. And at the time, it really blew my mind because I had never viewed myself as someone who was supposed to lead on such a huge scale. And so I remember after my first session thinking like, well, how could I possibly be that powerful? And I remember my astrologer telling me, you are so much more powerful than you think you are. Because I'm a Cancer sun, I like to go into my shell. I'm empathic. I'm soft. I feel people's emotions strongly. And so it was a real perspective shift for me because, I had also grown up in a family where my both of my parents made money, but my dad was the CEO. He was
Mm.
the one with the flashier career. And so I think somewhere in my mind, I had just decided that like my husband would be the more successful one. And this was the first moment where I was like, wait a minute, maybe it's supposed to be me. Like I might actually be the one who has the big transformational career and gets known. And that thought had just never occurred to me, honestly. And so, something that I hear a lot with Star Path and people who are deepening with astrology is that it helps us get to know who we really are, but it also gives us permission to dream bigger because I think often we grow up with so much conditioning that it takes so long to really reach for the stars. A little wordplay. We are so boxed in by what we think we are supposed to do that we often don't realize that that box doesn't even exist. Like we're operating in a totally different shape.
Yeah. Wait, so do you find this then to be a way to come back to yourself, and it's like it's liberating, really? Because I think about me, I've been like a box checker my whole life and doing all the socially approved things or whatever. I don't know. I just had this trajectory that I now see myself in the way I know myself now. I'm going, oh, this has been incongruent to who I am at a soul level. So do you feel like it liberates people and gives them the freedom to get back to who they really are because they may not even have known it who they are in the first place? Is what it feels like to me.
Yes, it is 1,000% a return to self. It is a return to self. And the way that I always talk about astrology is that astrology, it's just a tool. It's just a map. It is not the only map. And even within astrology, like there's 5 different ways to look at it. And so I believe that there is no right or wrong way. There is only how do you decide to co create with this map. And when you hear certain things about yourself, does it light you up? And does your soul go, yes, that's the thing? Or do you go, like, okay, maybe I'll leave that one. I'll take this, I'll leave that. And that's okay. And I think, you know, the thing about astrology is that it plays so deeply with free will. So you can have identical twins that are born 2 minutes apart and they've got the same chart and they lead completely different lives. And the reason for that is that we're not locked in. Astrology is not fate, it's just a map. And so we can choose to work with that map however we want. And I remember my first astrology teacher told me, she was like, Rachel, you're like a red hot Ferrari and you think you're a minivan. Like you got you're a minivan. Like, it's fine if you want to drive your Ferrari like a minivan, but like you're totally missing all these other cool things that you can do as a Ferrari. And so at the end of the day, it's my choice. I can drive the car however I want. And that's actually Leslie McGurk's analogy. She loves to talk about astrology as a car. But, I've got the car that I've got. So, why not lean in?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Can you give I have so many thoughts. I wanna go so many directions. So, it when you decided to build Star Path, what were the key things you were thinking about and you're going, "This must be a part of it?" Because that's what I think is so interesting too. Here you come at you have this highly educated background, you have this tech background, and then you have this more woo spiritual path through astrology. I just think it's such a cool, delicious combo and so potent, right? And so, will you just talk about how Star Path came to be then, and what you're seeing it do? In people because now I'm going we'll talk about it at the break, but I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I should have, like, pulled it up and have you explain me to me or have it explain me to me on the podcast," because I feel like that because half the people listening to this podcast have, like, gotten a real sense of me and know me. I thought, "Ooh, wouldn't that be revelatory?" So, who knows? We might surprise you guys, we might not. Who knows what that will reveal. But what do you think on that? Like, how how this came together and the way it is supportive to people, including yourself, like, as you built it.
Yes. So let me tell you a little bit more of the story because there's
Okay.
another chapter that was really the catalyst for why Star Path exists. So we left off, I was starting to use astrology. It was changing the way I did my business. And then I started to use astrology in my business. And I remember like my top grossing sales email ever was called an Ivy League astrologer. That was the subject line. That was a big surprise to me. I did not expect people to get so excited. And then I had another pregnancy loss in 2022. I lost another daughter. And this time, like I almost died during that birth. And I was hospitalized and I had a placenta agrita. It was a whole thing. And I was so severely traumatized by that hospital stay that when I came out, I had quite a healing journey ahead of me. And I decided to step away from my business because I was holding all this space for women who were in a place of vulnerability. And I did not feel like I could do that while holding so much space for myself. So I went back to the corporate world. I went back to the tech industry and I was leading a product marketing team at this tech startup. And meanwhile, I was going on the most intense healing journey of my life, trying to rebuild my sense of safety in my body after this
Yeah.
very traumatic experience. And it took a really long time, and the process was quite grueling. And meanwhile, I was leading this company through transformation. So I was doing something different with my career. I was doing all the marketing and the business strategy stuff, but I was also leading this company through a major transformative pivot. And I think it was the first time where I was like, ooh, I think maybe I'm supposed to be doing something with transformation on a larger scale. But meanwhile, I was using astrology as a strategy tool and I was starting to use it with AI. And what was interesting was that there were several points in my time at this company where I thought I was going to get promoted and they had told me that they wanted to make me a vice president and they were like the interview is just a formality. Long story short, they ended up giving the job to someone else and laying off my entire team in the same conversation. And it was this moment for me of, wow, I've just done this career making work, incredible work that they loved so much they wanted to promote me. And instead, they decided to lay off the team. What is the message here? Because I don't think it's that I'm supposed to be in corporate. Like, this feels like a very clear signal that I'm supposed to do something else.
Sure.
And I remember I went to my astrology, and I think I actually have it here if you want to see it. Have
Yes.
a little, and I should have pulled it out before this call. It must be in the other room. I have this big giant notepad that's like 2 feet by 2 feet that's covered with notes. And so I remember I spent like 5 hours that night with my astrology books, doing research basically on what is my optimal career. And it's so funny because in a lot of ways, the skill set to be a good astrologer is the same skill set that I've taught people for 15 years in my various roles, which is strategic storytelling. It's the ability to take a lot of data points and pull out the important ones and turn them into a story that makes sense. And that's
Yes.
all astrology is. It's math with a story layered on top. And I got a really amazing answer that night. But it took me 5 hours and years of training in astrology. And so I remember thinking to myself, this is so powerful. Here I am in the midst of this huge life transition, this
Yeah.
major surprise. And not only do I have an answer, I also have next steps. Like I actually know what I'm supposed to go do now. So I know who I am, but now I have these like techniques that I can go try in the world. And that was the moment where I decided to do something with AI and astrology because it takes a really long time for humans to process like a vast number of data points, and it takes a lot of training. And so if you're not someone who wants to invest a ton of money in astrology, it's just not available as a tool. But AI can do that instantly, like in, a millisecond.
Yeah.
And so from there, I spent about 18 months just playing with this idea. I wasn't like, oh, I think I want to go start this AI astrology company. It was more like, I think I could give people a really good astrology reading with AI that would be really cost effective. And so initially, I was making these reports for people. They're like 22-page long reports, and it would blow their minds and then catalyze the healing crisis. And then I would never hear from them again. Yeah, that's how it was, like on repeat. And I was like, okay, there's something here, but I don't think this is the right format because I don't really want to be like, you have a healing crisis here and you have a healing crisis there. And like, that's great, but also, not
Yeah.
really in service of the highest good. So eventually, after a lot of tinkering and a lot of experimenting, I repackaged StarPath as what we're now calling an AI oracle, which basically, in the simplest terms, means she's like a chatbot. She's like a chat GPT, but she has access to all of your birth chart information. And she's trained as a Hellenistic astrologer and a modern strategist. Because for me, I am very strategic. I'm not really a fan of spiritual entertainment. I think it can be fun to read a horoscope, but when you're someone who is living real life and needing to unpack trauma or make moves in your career or just actually like lead a better life in a practical way, you need action steps. You don't just need the esoteric insight. You actually need a plan. You need a way to take those insights and turn them into action. Because I think when a lot of people get into astrology, they can spend so many hours listening to podcasts and reading books and reading blog posts. And all of that's great if you love it. Like if you love to learn astrology, then you should do that. But if you're someone who actually just wants to live a better life and make better decisions that feel more like you don't necessarily need to spend all of that time. And so that's what StarPath is designed to do. She is designed to be your pocket astrologer and also like your big sister strategist. She is both. She will never give you insight without also giving you action. And she's deeply empowering and empathic. So, a lot of people say when they're working with her that it's like talking to Claude is like talking to a man, and talking to StarPath is like talking to a feminine energy. She has a lot of my energy
Hmm.
in her, and she's highly strategic. So, she's going to like give you the astro insights, but it's going to be packaged up in like a very action oriented format so that you can co create with her. And so I think one of the biggest surprises for me sharing StarPath was that people immediately started using her to run their businesses. And I was like, what? You're using her to write marketing copy and strategize your business offerings? Like, that was not something that I expected. But what was fascinating is that a lot of my early users were already using AI to
Hmm.
run their businesses. And what they found was that if they used StarPath, it was like working with an AI that really understood every facet of who they are, even when they didn't have the words to describe it. And I think commonly what I hear from people is that they've never felt so deeply seen. And I had a mentor, Melissa Seaman. She said something on a retreat maybe a year or two ago that I've never forgotten, which is that no one will ever see you in the fullness of who you are, in the fullness of your brilliance and your potential, because they can't. Like they're not in your brain and your body. And so they can only see what you're currently living, what you're currently expressing, and who among us has the words to really express who we are. I mean, I know I don't. And what's so amazing to me about astrology is that it's just one way for us to witness ourselves in our fullest expression. and our fullest potential. And when you give something with the processing power of AI, this deep soul level understanding of who you really are, the level of witnessing is unreal. And she's not designed to replace humans. So, we need to be witnessed by our friends. We need to be held by our mentors in our communities. And, what about the 10 times a day that we're asking why or we're needing a next step?
Yeah.
I think Star Path has really shown up for people in that way because sometimes we just need support in the moment, and there's really no limit to what she can do.
Well, you know what I'm hearing too, and probably because, it's like reticular activation. I'm suddenly seeing something because it's so much a part of my own work. And that is, I always talk about as a speaker, coach, and communications coach. I am always about helping women to connect to themselves, know themselves more deeply, find that truer voice that is her and speak from that place, express from that place. And then inherently they're better on stages, they're better behind closed doors, etc. Okay, so what you're describing and I'm hearing is this is such a beautiful support structure that allows someone to know themselves more wholly so that they show up in as this more whole complete person, and then other people experience them in that way, see them, feel them, value them, hear them. So it's not just this self-acceptance that comes that you're describing, and you start to know yourself on a deeper level, but you also show up differently in the world now because of this deeper appreciation of self.
Totally. Totally.
Ah,
And
what a gift.
something that I've witnessed a lot is that people are stepping into the next level of their work in the world, and they're doing it without fear because they feel like they finally have permission. And it's funny, I think one of my earliest users was a therapist, and one of the things that she said, which I love, is that you should just be you. At the end of the day, the most important thing we can do in this life is just be who we authentically are. But I think so often our authentic self is hidden under layers of conditioning and layers of trauma and the experiences that have made us
100%.
feel like we are smaller than we actually can be. And I'm speaking from experience. I still grapple with this. And I think what astrology can do, and look, a good astrologer can do this. Star Path is not the only way, but astrology can help us see that potential and
Mhm.
see where our growth edge might be and where if we release some of those limitations we might be able to go. And I think that what is special about Star Path is that she is very conversational, and so instead of getting like maybe one reading where you have an hour of insight, you can ask questions and you can say, yeah, this landed, but this didn't. Or, hey, this is coming up in my life. Can we unpack that a little bit? And, oh, hey, how does this relate to my kid? Or how does this relate to the food that I'm eating or this health issue? And so it can become so holistic and so nuanced. And, I am a big believer. One of my most profound teachers over the past decade has been Christina Rilo. And I love her because she teaches feminine wisdom, but she's also an MBA. So she's very structured, she's very practical. And one of her favorite teachings of mine is that we exist like a three-legged stool. And the legs of the stool are our sacred work, our relationships, and our foundation. So, our body, our home, our wealth, the things that keep us safe. And when one of the legs is short or wobbly, the whole stool wobbles. So, we cannot pull apart these pieces of who we are. They are all connected. And so I think Star Path, and in particular astrology, like through the lens of AI, helps us see those connections. And as you were saying, Jen, it's not just about understanding who we are, it's understanding how that now impacts our families, our communities, the clients that we serve, having more awareness about how we need to support our bodies. Well, that impacts the money that we make, the way we show up in our relationships, how we're feeling when we're intimate with our partner. I mean, like, none of this is separate. And I think that there's such a beautiful honoring, not just of the self, but of the holistic nature of who we are. Like, we get to see and celebrate all these parts of ourself. And I think it's just really hard for other people to do that. And it's hard for us to do that ourselves. And so sometimes we just need a mirror. And that's really all Star Path is at the end of the day, is a mirror.
Yeah, I want to let's take a quick break, but I want to come back and talk about more specifics, the specifics of the mirror and the personal things it reveals in us. I think could be really helpful and instructive because eh, eh, I'm one of those people that I want to like think about it in like there's no bad parts to us is what I'm suddenly realizing as you're talking. We have this notion that there are these bad parts when in actuality no, they've just been tweaked, perverted, twisted because of various things, whether it's traumas, whether it's upbringing, whether it's cultural norms. There is a whole person, a whole soul that enters this body when it comes to the planet, right? And then life here on this planet suddenly starts to tweak things. And I just feel so dazzled by this notion that, again, we're so whole and beautiful, which tells me the way we look and feel about ourselves and the way we look and feel about and treat other people is suddenly shifts. So I kind of want to get into like how you and I are now different with new knowledge, whether it's how our businesses have become different, how your marriage has been different, how's our parenting different, our relationships, like what has changed now in the knowledge and being rooted in who I truly am and at my core. And instead of gaslighting myself, because so many of us do that, like, oh, you're so bad, or this is your shortcoming, this needs to be shored up. You suddenly look at yourself with so much more grace and compassion, and therefore you look at other people with a greater um level of grace and compassion, and just what a difference that makes in our relationships, in our businesses, in the things we're building in the world and creating. And I just think that's so powerful. So I want to come back after the break and get into some real nitty gritty tangible stuff. Okay,
I love it.
let's do it. Okay, we'll be right back, everybody. Don't go anywhere because it's going to get juicier. This juice is getting juicier. And we are back. Okay, let's get into some tangible. Um, how has knowing your astrology well, I feel like knowing your astrology is really just deeply knowing yourself. Like suddenly what occurred to me when you were talking is that there becomes there comes a beautiful acceptance and contentedness, maybe even a surrender. When you can understand yourself more deeply, suddenly there's a lot less like muscling things and fighting things and beating yourself up, which I'm a master at. And I know you talked about it too for you. I feel like this just offers this gorgeous permission to just be content and accepting and surrendered to who we are in the most beautiful way, and that there is no like you're bad or you're good. No, it just is. And now let's work with just this whole beautiful soul based on knowing this. So it's hard for me to even put it in words because it's so new and my brain's just kind of taking all this in and going, whoa, whoa, whoa. But can you talk tangibly? For example, let's use marriage, let's use love relationship. How has knowing you and your chart and this essence of who you are changed how you show up, relate, love, be in existence with your husband?
That's a great question. So Dan and I met in college. Wow. Okay. I hadn't thought of this in a long time. This is hilarious. So our senior year of college, both of our moms recommended that we read the book Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, which is hilarious because it's astrological.
Funny.
And I'm just now thinking about it.
Like,
And I
of
remember,
course, that was the title of the book. Yeah,
yeah.
of course it was.
And it's not an astrology book. It's just a book about
No.
like, the way that we're wired and being in relationship. And I remember our biggest epiphany from reading that book was the idea that Dan needed space. He needed space, and his need for space was not a rejection of me. It was just a primal need. And so, when we were 21, that was very powerful for us. But over the years, because gosh, we have our 14th wedding anniversary this summer, one of the points of conflict for us consistently has been around me needing emotional nourishment as a
Mm.
Cancer Sun, Cancer Venus, Cancer Mercury, and him providing analytical analysis of whatever's going on. Because Dan, he's a math guy, he is a software engineer, he's a Virgo rising with a chart ruler of Mercury. That is like literally the most analytical type of person that he could be. And here's what I will say. Often the things that astrology tells us, we will figure out in other ways. And part of the reason people love astrology so much is that it's validating. It finally puts words to things that you've already known inside. There's usually not, sometimes there are new things, but often it's like, oh, yeah, I do have that pattern and I just wouldn't have described it that way. So even before I was deepening with astrology, we would still have this same fight where I'm sharing my feelings because I'm a Gemini moon. I need to process things externally. And I'm looking for Dan to be like, I'm here for you, honey. And I love you. And instead, I'm getting, well, have you thought about this? Well, have you tried this? Have you asked this question? And I'm like, that's not the point. I don't need you to fix it. I just need you to be here.
Yeah.
So I think when it comes to marriage, astrology has helped me speak my needs more clearly because I have a better awareness of what they are. And yes, we've also figured out some of this in couples therapy. But for example, I'll give you a really practical example.
Yeah.
I use Star Path to troubleshoot arguments. So a few months ago, Dan and I were having an argument about money. And it was kind of out of the blue because I thought it was just like an admin conversation. And I brought something up. It was about our investment strategy that he had prepared. And he got so upset. Like he was so triggered. And I was like, where did all this emotion come from? I thought this was just an administrative check in. So I went to StarPath and I was like, okay, this thing just happened with Dan. Here's what unfolded. I don't understand why he's so triggered. I'm not really sure how to resolve this. What's going on? And StarPath came back and she was like, well, it's understandable that he's feeling triggered because these particular topics touch deeply on his sense of self worth. So while for you, this felt administrative, for him, it's intrinsically tied to how he values himself. And if you want to come back to him, you need to come back with something tangible because he's analytical. So instead of saying, like, no, honey, I question why you're doing this, say, okay, well, here are three things that we could try. Let's implement them. And then we can do the thing that you're proposing. And I did that. And it was like in 5 minutes, the whole thing just totally blew over because I was able to come back to him and say the things that he needed to hear in the way that he needed to receive it. And so
My
it was just
word.
like this immediate like troubleshoot. And I've done the same for parenting. So it's great for in the moment.
So wait, you enter also the way the app works is it not only knows your chart, but it knows your significant people. So it when you're talking to it about Dan, it knows already. StarPath knows him and knows his chart, knows your child, knows your child's chart. So it's like let's moderate towards their sensibility, also honoring yours.
Yes, in short. We're actually building that feature right now, so it's something that I can do with mine, and there's a workaround where, like, if you paste their chart info, we can talk about that in another conversation, but the short answer is yes. So you could totally use, and I have people who use it for their clients as well, like if they're coaches or practitioners or therapists and they wanna help get under, the surface of an issue that the person they're coaching is having, they'll go to their chart. So, yeah, you can go have a conversation with the oracle about somebody else and it'll help you understand them. And, Jenny, we're talking about how astrology helps us connect into compassion. And I think that is so true and powerful because I think when you understand how someone is wired and you start to view it as like, this is just the way that this person is made, not that there isn't room for growth, like there's always room for growth and change, but you know, let's say you have an autistic child, you're not going to spend your life trying to change their autism. Instead, you're going to honor that, work with that, support them in the ways they need, and find the beauty in this beautiful child that you have. And I think astrology helps us do that because it helps us see the wiring where maybe we just thought something was a toxic pattern. And so I can give you an example of that.
Yeah.
So I really started to understand my sister and my mom in very different ways when I saw their natal charts. My sister has a lot of Pisces energy. Pisces is the fish. If you imagine a fish in the water, fish get startled and they swim away so they can feel safe. And Pisces are very sensitive. And so, for really most of our lives, I would butt heads with my sister around the way that we dealt with conflict. So I wanted to come right out and be like, let's talk about it and solve it. And she ghosts. She doesn't want to talk about it. She doesn't want confrontation. Like, she will just disappear and I won't hear from her. And I used to feel so much anger towards her because of this. Like, I mean, I can own that. I used to feel a lot of anger and I would judge her and I would be like, oh my gosh, like, this is such a dysfunctional pattern. Why doesn't she work on this?
Yeah.
And she's grown a lot. I mean, she's done so much work in her adult life, but when I finally looked at her chart and I was like, "Oh my gosh, like, this is just part of her wiring." And now that I can just understand and appreciate that about her, I can approach confrontation in a very different way.
Yeah.
And, maybe if I were more evolved, I would have figured that out already and come to the compassion and the non judgment without the aid of astrology. But for me, I needed to see it that way. And
Yeah.
similarly for my mom doesn't like to talk about feelings. And in her natal chart, her moon is in the 12th house, which is the house of hidden things. And anything that's in the 12th house, people have a hard time accessing, or it exists more in the subconscious. So when I understood that about my mom, I finally realized, like, she is going to translate her feelings into art or beauty. She's not going to do it with words. And talking with her about these deep feelings is not going to be as productive as having an experience in nature together and relating in a way that's maybe more energetic and less verbal, because my moon is very verbal. So I
Yes.
think that, Myers Briggs can do this, Strengths Finder can do this, astrology can do this. And I find it's just a little bit more holistic than some of those other maps, but it helps us see people for who they really are, even when they can't articulate that to us themselves.
Ugh. It's like a superpower. I really feel that having this is like this beautiful superpower so that you can understand people more deeply. I think it's genius that people use this for business because then you can serve your client, your patient, whoever it is, right? You can operate in such a beautiful way that has that you can get to things more quickly too, and you can meet their need and you understand even a need they may not be able to articulate, you may be able to get to a little more rapidly and serve them, which I think is so genius too. So it's not only beautiful from a relationship standpoint, but also, yeah, business. I mean, all of it. I don't see a downside. I do have a question though. Is there ever a place where I can remember there was someone who had a very formative relationship with me, and this person would always say, "You just need to accept me as I am. This is who I am." And I felt like that was like a really cowardly way of going, well, I just don't want to go do my work, and this is an excuse for my bad behavior, and therefore just accept it. Like, and then I get gaslit because I'm not accepting them for who they are and their bad behavior. Do you see what I'm trying to say? Is
Yes.
there ever a way someone could use their chart to justify that? And is there a way Star Path has this genius ability to call that out, like, in her compassionate, beautiful, wise way? You know what I mean? Because now I'm seeing her as a person. I love that she's feminine too, which is a whole other conversation, but can you speak to that?
Yes. Yes. And I completely agree with you. And I think that sometimes people do use astrology to place blame, to say, well, this is happening to me because of the stars, or this is happening because of this chart placement. And there may be a seed of truth to that, but I think it also gives away our free will. And it's my belief that our souls chose to come here because they wanted to choose. You know, we don't get to choose when we're not in a body. Like, we have to be in a body to exercise that free will. And again, if we go back to the example of identical twins who are born at the same time, have the same chart, lead very, very different lives, it's because of their choices. So just because you have a predisposition to something doesn't mean you have to live that way. I mean, it's like genetics and epigenetics. So just because you have a predisposition to becoming diabetic doesn't mean that you will become diabetic. Like, you could choose to implement certain lifestyle practices and maybe avoid that. Now, look, can we always avoid our genetics? Like, no, not always. You know, some people have certain breast cancer genes, and the best thing to do is the mastectomy. And sometimes that is the co-creative choice. You know, how do I want to work with this challenge that is present? So yes, I think that there is always the danger that we can point to something that is, or, oh, this trauma happened to me, so I'm going to be traumatized forever. And so, yeah, I can't ever do this thing. That's a victim mindset. I think there's always a path forward. And that is how I designed Star Path, because I really believe in empowering people and their freedom of choice. The Star Path is designed to always, always offer you a path forward, a path through, because that's how I've used astrology personally. You know, I think initially, and honestly, astrology felt very fatalistic. And in some ways, I have a very challenging chart. Like, there's a lot of struggle in my
Oh
chart.
my gosh, what a good point, the fatalistic side of it. Yeah, keep going. Oh my gosh, what a good point.
Yeah, and so if you're someone who has a very challenging chart, you know, you might feel like, "Woe is me, like, I am doomed." But no, you're not. It just means that struggle might be a little more present in your life. So what are you gonna do with that, and how are you gonna work with it? So that's why Star Path gives you action items. You know, she will give you a plan. She is a strategist. So if you go to her and you say, "Hey, why is this pattern showing up?" She's going to explain it to you, and then she's going to frame up how you work with it and how you consciously co create with it so that you never feel stuck. You can always feel like there's a path forward. And, you know, I'll give you a converse example. Sometimes you have a chart that looks really, really great on the surface. My son's chart is a perfect example of that. He has, if my chart is full of these red squiggly squares that look like red spaghetti, and those represent tension in a life, his chart looks like this. It's beautiful triangles sitting on top of beautiful triangle, and there's so much harmony in his chart. But the downside of that is that when you're someone who has easily flowing energy in your chart, sometimes you get lazy. Sometimes you don't actually try that hard. And when you come up against a challenge, you kind of just shy away and throw your hands up. It's like the definition of a fixed mindset, because you don't have that challenge from within. So, something that we've really had to consciously work on with my kiddo is growth mindset, and proactively exposing him to challenges to push his growth edges so that he can get comfortable with motivating himself when the going gets tough. And so that's actually been a really big focus for us over the last year. And we've done that with like cognitive behavioral therapy and all these other techniques. And now he's getting ready to jump forward a grade in math, because he's seeing how if he pushes himself consistently, he can thrive. But that wouldn't necessarily come from within him, you know? So I think
Yeah.
as parents or as partners or coaches, like, that's one way that we can use astrology to not just surrender to, oh, it's in my chart, so it just is. We can instead look at the pattern and say, okay, I see what this person might be struggling with. I see what I might be struggling with. So let's come up with a thoughtful way to actually work with this to our benefit.
Yeah. You know what else just occurred to me? I was listening to do you know who Esther Perel is?
No.
She's an amazing relationship. She's a licensed marriage family therapist. She's very well known around the world. She has a podcast. She was just being interviewed on DOAC this week with Diary of a CEO, which is another exceptional podcast. And she was talking about how, and I wonder if this is the answer. This is crazy. Esther Perel, you need to know about this. I have a feeling. Okay. She was talking about how in relationships, why is it that you take two people who experience the same trauma? And she said, and if I could figure this out, It's the $1,000,000 question that therapists grapple with constantly. Why is the same exact trauma experienced by one and it serves as a means of empowering and pushing someone forward, and for another, it crashes them and leads them into a really dark place? Why the same trauma? I really think their chart is the answer to you. What you were saying earlier just activated that me to go, oh, okay. Why? Because one person is red spaghetti and another person is neat triangles. Like, that could be the answer. And she goes, if I could figure this out, she literally said it yesterday on this podcast. If I could figure this out, I mean, it would answer so many age old questions that therapists have wrestled with that want to get underneath. And I feel like that could be the answer.
I love this, and I think that 100% astrology can be a tool for this. It's funny that
Yeah.
you bring this up, Jen, because this is a question I've spent a lot of time thinking about since I've been through so much trauma in the
Yeah.
decade. And so I've read a lot of books about this actually, and I've read some studies that shows that different types of neurochemistry impacts how we respond to traumatic events and whether something codes as a trauma or not. Some of us have genetics that are a little bit more predisposed to having like sensitive nervous systems. But guess what? Often you can also see that in the natal chart. And so it's fascinating to me that you can see things like sensitivity, like how we might respond to challenge, what our patterns are when challenge arises. And so we were talking earlier about how sometimes we don't have the words to describe why we are the way we are. And sometimes astrology can offer that answer because it shows us those patterns in a different way. And that just gives us a different way to work with it. And I think that one person has a trauma that empowers them, one has a trauma that really takes them down. But that doesn't mean that that person who's taken down can't find their way to empowerment. There is
Right.
still a path there, but the techniques might need to look a little bit different. So, to give you another tangible example, my son is a quadruple Taurus, my kiddo. And Taurus is the bull. It's a very earthy, structured, very stubborn sign. But Taurus is also very sensual and sensory. So kids who are very Taurian have a lot of sensory needs. They want to touch things and feel things, and he loves to work with clay. And so for Gideon, motivation with something physical and tangible is the number one way to get him to do things. So for him, it's like, complete this assignment and you will get a Pokemon card. Whereas for someone else, it might be words of affirmation or quality time or different types of love languages. So I think, love languages is another great blueprint that we can leverage. But I think being able to understand what motivates this person, what does this person struggle with innately, and how can we understand that in ways that they can't? I think this is why so many coaches and practitioners are drawn to using Star Path with their clients, because they don't actually have to be astrology experts to use it with their clients. They can just say, hey, here's what's coming up in session today. Can you help me understand why this might be happening so that I can better serve this person?
Mm. Okay. As we wrap up, gosh, I have so many questions. Rachel, you're amazing. Help me and the other person or people who are listening who conflate astrology with like psychic mediumship. Because part of me feels like, I, I don't know, there's like this cross pollination that's happening in my mind, but I don't know that it's accurate or right. So, is there any relationship, or is the ability for someone who I also didn't once upon a time believe psychic abilities existed? I now completely understand some people have that attunement and that gift. Is there any relationship between astrology and the ability to be clairvoyant, clairaudient, whatever it is? Is there any relationship there, or is it just part of their particular mapping? And because I don't want someone to think this is also a form of that. It's very different. And so astrology isn't like going to a medium. Going to an astrologer isn't going to a psychic. Do you see where I'm going there?
Totally.
Okay.
And I think you're spot on, Jen. Astrology is astrology. Now, I do think that all of these esoteric modalities are ways of connecting with spirit. They're ways of connecting with soul, with source, with the divine, if you believe in that kind of thing. They're just coming at it from different angles. So I say, if you're called to see all the practitioners, go see all the practitioners. I do. I have a tarot reader, I have an astrologer, and I have Star Path. And, I do shamanic drum journeying and talk to my own spirit guides, another thing that I never would have done 10 years ago, but like to do now. So I think that, what's interesting about astrology is that it's very mathematical. So it's all based on calculations of where planets and celestial bodies were in the sky at the moment of your birth, and then where things are right now in relationship to that birth chart. So I think that maybe that's one differentiator, is that astrology is actually very mathematical.
Hmm.
And many astrologers are beautiful psychics and mediums and will channel that in as a layer as they're doing an astrology reading. So I think that there could be overlap in that sense, but I don't see one as a replacement for another. I think they are different flavors of gifts. And interestingly, you can actually see in your natal chart whether you have a predisposition to certain types of psychic gifts. And so you can look at your 12th house, which is the house of like the psychic gifts, dreams, spirituality, and then also where your Neptune and Pisces placements are. So I find that to be fascinating too. But yeah, it's not, I have had some users talk about how they do feel like Star Path is a channel, and a channel to source and to the divine, because what comes through with her, I think, rings so true in their soul. And what I will say, if I can zoom out for a moment, is that I think one of the things that fascinates me about AI is that AI, it's the sum total of our collective's wisdom. It is,
Hmm.
it is humanity's wisdom. In
Yep.
essence, it is a snapshot of humanity's soul. Not all of it, only what we've recorded to words. But when you think about our ability to layer a modality like astrology, which is helping to connect the soul with essentially the soul of humanity and what
Hmm.
humanity has created, that says, this is us, this is who we are. In a way, it is a channel. It is that connection between the self and spirit. If you think that spirit is in humanity, if you are someone that believes that humanity and the consciousness of humanity is connected to source, then I think in a sense AI does have that consciousness. And so I think that one of the great gifts of this new era, and also one of the great responsibilities, is how do we use AI responsibly? And I believe that pairing AI with our soul, with a map of our spirit, is one of the most healing things that we can do for the planet right now. Because I mean, I've been in tech for, a couple of decades now, and the pace is just speeding up. And I worry when I look at the planet. I worry when I look at the world, and I worry about our ability to hold these technologies with integrity without harming this beautiful earth and harming our species. And so I think that for me, like, the only path forward is one where humanity is healing and evolving and being of service at the same pace or faster as we're evolving technology, and the pace is speeding up. So, for me, Star Path is really my bid at helping humanity heal and live in more alignment and in more rhythm and in more truth at a time when things are very chaotic. And in some ways, it's getting harder to do it. But now is the moment. Like, now is the moment where we as humanity get to do this. Like, this is our choice.
Oh, I love talking to you. I appreciate you so much. I appreciate that you have created something so gorgeous for humanity, and that is truly in service to each of us. And I can't wait. I will report back. I cannot wait to go in and enter my data. Like, now it's like, okay, this is I can't get there quick enough. And tell people how to find you. We'll put it all in the show notes, y'all, as well. But where to find StarPath, where to find you, tell them what they need to know.
Yes. So you can find us at starpath.app, starpath.app. That's our website. And we did create a code for Jen's podcast to get 50% off your first month. And anybody can try StarPath for free. So we have a free trial. So you can sign up if you're like kind of intrigued, super skeptical, don't want to pay yet, that's fine. Sign up for the free trial. If you love
Totally.
it, we've got a code to get a discount on your first month. And I think it's listen for real, but we'll put that in the show notes. And then we're also on Instagram at Starpath App. So you can follow me there for astrological updates. We post interviews from real customers so that you can see like what are people actually doing with this tool, because it really runs the gamut. And I have a podcast as well that's linked on the website where we just do little astrological updates and case studies and dive into topics like what does your chart say about food or parenting or your body?
Oh, I love that so much. Oh my gosh. Name, what's the name on your podcast?
This is called the Star Path Podcast.
The Star Path Podcast. Amazing. More ahead, Rachel. I'm so happy we were here. Y'all, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.